Welcome to the Lubbock or Leave It podcast, a recruiting specific podcast on RedRaidersports.com. I'm Matt Clare. He's Ben Golan. First, we want to thank our title sponsor, Carnley Properties. If you are looking for help in the real estate market in the greater Austin area, whether that's in the city, looking to just buy land out in the country, looking to do a variety of things, you need somebody in your corner like Kayden Carr and his team. They can help you out. They can help you save money. They can help you make the most of your investment. And at the end of the day, they're great Red Raiders. They're part of the Red Raider sports community. So to Clayton and his team, we appreciate the support. We'll add the contact info for Carnley Properties. And again, please reach out to them for all of your real estate needs in the greater Austin metro. With that being said, Ben, how are you, sir?
Doing good, Matt. How are you? I also wanted to give a shout out real quick to Home Field Apparel. You need some comfortable tech clothing. They got some cool throwback gear. We both have shirts. They're running their Black Friday special starting on November 26th through the 29th, and all items will be 20% off. So, good time to go get yourself or your loved ones or any sports fan in your life, some comfortable, homefieldapparel.com.
Yeah, and I think the cool part about that is, just for me, right? Of course, my family would probably be ordering the double T stuff, but my two younger brothers went to Arkansas. Home Field's got pretty much every college you can think of, in the Power 5 level. So if you've got a mixed group with the family, the siblings, the in-laws, whoever, definitely take advantage of that promotion code. We'll post that as well. But Ben, man, we've joked the past couple of weeks, but it is real. The hire of Joey McGuire was covered last week. James Blanchard is the director of player personnel. These two guys have literally hit the ground running. All of the other coaches that are still on staff are certainly focused on the week to week and the game planning, but even they're in touch with some of these prospects. But we have seen, I don't know what we said last week, been nearly 40 offers. I would imagine that's nearly, I don't know, up to 65 or 70 at least at this point.
Agree.
Okay. We have our group chat, and I sent a snapshot of my cell phone screen because I don't think I've ever seen this. We add the little tab, that says, update or story or whatever. Right. And we have the one for offer. Well, when I refreshed the page, I thought I had accidentally hit the filter, and no, it was just that many offers that was crowding, all the normal threads. And so definitely interesting. We're in the thick of it. And, long term, we'll be able to get a little more granular about, 2023 offers and what that looks like. I think at last glance, I know that changed after today, but it was 89 total offers. And I'm just kind of going to give a ballpark here. But, really 2 weeks ago, even before Joey McGuire was hired, the 2023 offers been, what would you say? There were about maybe 35 out there.
Yeah,
So,
and a few of those, just were not going to happen. So you've just completely changed the board over in a week.
yeah, it's been wild. It's so many prospects, and I think the biggest difference maybe that we see is just with we talked about relationships, and that's probably a good segue. We wanted to start with 2023 recruiting because that wasn't really even a topic of conversation a whole lot on this podcast. Maybe here and there because we saw some quarterback offers and we talked through that maybe through the summer and the camp season. But again, with a small amount of offers and some kids that, maybe weren't considering, I don't know if that's fair, or maybe had their eyes set, on other places or maybe even were already committed. There just wasn't a lot of momentum there. Now you fast forward a week and they have 2 commitments this week, Ben. I know you interviewed Amarillo's Kayden Carr, younger brother of Tyler Carr. He commits an Under Armour All-American prospect, 3 stars on Rivals. Just a pretty big kid, right? So he comes on board after the staff offers him. And I believe you even saw him over a year ago in Oklahoma for the Under Armour camp. So I'll let you sort of fill the listeners in on Kayden and kind of what he brings to the table.
Yeah, big kid, like you mentioned, 6'5", 6'6", very versatile. He told me he's played both tackle positions and both guard in high school. He takes pride in that, where he's not just locked into one position. But yeah, just a very impressive and just quick, commitment that McGuire was able to get, because this wasn't a guy that Tech has, offered a year ago under the previous staff. And there's been no, I mean, he was offered Sunday and committed on Monday. It's just that quickly. And he told me, he's been thinking about staying at home. So it sounds like, he kind of, wanted that Tech offer or wanted that opportunity. But I mean, you look at the programs that have already offered him: Arizona State, Oregon, TCU, Louisville. I mean, Kansas, Houston, just, some Power Five programs there. And I think, you get him, you get the other young man we're about to talk about, Isaiah Crawford, both in the trenches. That's where, I mean, it starts. That's where this program, hasn't had the quality maybe in recent years. And so just, I mean, again, just very impressive by the coaches and both Coach McGuire and Coach Blanchard, making that happen.
And I think the interesting part of Red Raider sports, and a big reason why anyone here listening that may or may not be on the board, is that, we'll post these in-depth stories and all these things that have been mentioned, but we're talking about Amarillo. So, I mean, there's Tech grads that are in that community that maybe have a closer relationship to the situation. And, Kayden Carr, we talk about the offers, we talk about Under Armour All-American, but he was invited to play football at IMG Academy. And The reason I mentioned this is one of our users mentioned that, yes, he did go, and, ultimately he wanted to move back home and play in Amarillo. And there's no shame to that, right? And so I think that, beside the coaching change, probably, helped his situation. Not only that, but his familiarity with the Tech program. But yeah, I agree with you. I don't think he was considering the Red Raiders. And so you kind of put those two things together with the coaching change, and, honestly, just kind of, we've seen it already, Joey McGuire's personality. I think it's going to create some momentum, because you hinted at it, but post defensive end Isaiah Crawford, commits a few days before him, or the day before. And, that's a Rivals 250 kid, top 120, I think 113th in the nation for the 2023 class. Just a big kid. And again, someone that just pops on tape. But I think the best part is he was committed to Baylor for the longest time. I think, 5 or 6 months, and he was committed to Coach McGuire. And I'm sure, actually, I shouldn't say I'm sure, I'm certain that he had a relationship with James Blanchard as well. And so, I just think I cheated a little bit. He's 133, not 113, potato. But the point is, I mean, this guy's got the offers as well. I believe he'll continue adding offers. I think there was a 1 to 2, maybe 3 day delay between he announced that he was decommitting from Baylor and then had committed to Texas Tech. Even in that span, Oklahoma State came in and offered. So not only will we see regional, but I think you'll see national interest for this young man. And that's kind of crazy to say out of post Texas. But I think he's starting to see a trend. These tall, these long kids that you could see them adding some weight to their frame, but they have that twitch. They've shown what they can do on the football field with that athleticism. And so I think for Crawford, I mean, it checks all the boxes. I mean, you could have hired any coach, right? And even back to the last head coach, and they're going to talk about wanting to keep West Texas kids at home. Well, not only has Coach McGuire kept West Texas kids at home, again, albeit with a verbal commitment, but you start your 2023 class with a Rivals 250 defensive end, and then you start the other side of the line with a Under Armour All-American offensive tackle, which is just a huge kid. And so, I think you hit the nail on the head. The game is played in the trenches. It's won in the trenches. That's really a differentiator between some of the better teams in the nation and, some of the other teams that are just competing for the middle or the bottom of the conference. And so I don't know. I just think, to me, regardless of the rankings, regardless of the accolades, Ben, for it to be one calendar week and to have all that happen and to start your 2023 class like that, I can't imagine it, coming together better, more perfectly, whatever you want to call it, right? Because any of us, let's say you clean up the old resume and take a new job. I mean, you don't do that kind of stuff within a week. You know what I mean? And I know that's different, but I mean, he's knocking it out of the park right now from a recruiting standpoint. And it's just only 2 guys. Like I mentioned, there are other guys that are going to be helping in the building, and they're going to eventually interview with Joey and all that. I'm sure they're helping, but I mean, he's going to bring in his own guys for coordinators, assistants. And once he gets all of that going, I can just only imagine that they're going to continuously turn over rocks like we talked about with Blanchard. And I don't know if we see this stop from a offer standpoint and a momentum standpoint. We saw 2024 offers and we're having 2025 visitors this
Yeah.
weekend. So anyway.
Well, you mentioned staff, one that I reported earlier today, Cody Belair coming over from LSU as the director of scouting. Nothing's been made official yet, but we believe that that's going to happen. But just going back to Crawford, I mean, 6'4", 210, Tech doesn't have many of these just pass rushers, on the roster. One of these guys who, it's a big play in the game. He's going to go beat the tackle and go get to the quarterback. I think that's what Crawford can bring. And I know Chase did a piece where he ranked him, among the defensive end. He's the highest ranked high school defensive end right now, in Rivals history to commit to Tech if he ends up signing, which is pretty crazy. There are a couple others, but they're all junior college guys. But pretty crazy to think about. And then just I talked about Carr earlier. Well, I mean, he's good friends with several of these guys. Major Everhart announced his reoffer today, and Kayden Carr is quote tweeting it saying, let's go, wreck him, and tagging the coaches. So, I mean, he told me in the interview story he's close with Avion Carter and some of these other guys too. So I just think getting these guys who want to recruit for you is just an added bonus.
Yeah, and I think, when we were talking pre-show, I know it's hard to name all of them, but when we talk about this concept of the reoffer, we've seen that for some of the underclassmen, but it's a bigger deal when you see it from someone like Major Everhart, who had Tech in their top three. You mentioned another West Texas prospect. I think you mentioned Eric Gray, who got his, actual first offer from Tech from Coach McGuire earlier in the week or late last week. And then, Kyler Jordan's a guy that, he didn't put it on Twitter, but it's your understanding that he also received that, quote unquote reoffer. And those are all things we knew were coming. But I think it's a very interesting layer of information, right? Because it's not like you and I can be like, hey, tell us what you're thinking right now. And then, tomorrow night, maybe tell me what you're thinking. It's hard to tell because these kids are going through a pretty delicate situation, right? They've made their commitments. And then in the case, especially of Kyler, the coaching staff is all pretty much still there except for McGuire. Right. And then of course, Majors is different because, Gary Patterson's no longer at TCU and that future is uncertain. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know, a lot of layers to that, Ben, but I think that they've got to have the offer to commit. And so I think that's the biggest difference so far. You control what you can control. Get them on the phone, you do your thing, you make the offer. I think it's going to pay dividends with a kid like Eric Gray. And man, I loved him at Rivals Camp, right? I mean, I really did. I know you wrote about it. I know we talked about it. He's not Kayden Carr, right? He's not 6'5", 6'6", whatever. But man, is he tough as nails. I mean, if you talk about if you talk about like in your article, like a center type prospect and or potentially defensive line, I mean, he has that punch and he has that leverage. And I think I didn't see him get beat really at all at that camp, and there was some pretty talented defensive linemen there. So anyway, I just thought for a kid driving in from Amarillo to Dallas that always stood out to me. And then I don't know, Ben, what are your thoughts on some of these guys? I mean, you can mention Kyler Jordan because that's West Texas, but there's other guys we wanted to talk about that are just wildly interesting to me. I'm going to pull up this. I've sorted it by offers, but Mansfield Summit, Joseph Adair, I don't know how you pronounce it specifically, but another 4-star defensive end, Mansfield Summit. So Tech was just there with Jacoby Jackson, Ensei Sledge, was a Baylor commit, and that had just gotten off an official visit to Oklahoma State. Yep. He decommits from Baylor. He has the Tech offer. What happens there? And then I think as early as today, right, they offered Trey Emery out of Mount Pleasant, who's a longtime Baylor commit. And so, Trey and I went back and forth. He's definitely has some level of interest, and he knows Coach McGuire. But again, kind of going back to that dynamic, Ben, it's hard for them to tell us what they're thinking. They're committed, and then even with Joseph as a TCU commit, same thing as Major, right? They don't know what that future holds. I would say out of all of these, Ben, I would say maybe Anse Sledge, and maybe we don't find out about it right away, but it would not shock me to see Joseph Adair also take a visit. I don't know about Emery. That just happened today, but I mean, these guys are basically what the early signing period does is either they sign in December and they're sure, or hey, why not? Let me take this visit. I know Coach McGuire and I want to see what it's all about, especially if you're a TCU commit and you've been committed that long. It's not like he doesn't have official visits left. And who's gonna say anything at TCU right now, right?
Yeah. A lot of Baylor commits, or in Sledge's case, former commits, and a lot of TCU commits have been offered. McGuire's not holding back. We got, there's Seth Martin's an offensive lineman currently
Right.
committed to TCU who's taken an official visit this weekend. And, I brought it up to you before the podcast. He had TCU commit in his bio, and that's no longer there. What does that mean? I don't know. We can only, you know, we
Stay
only see what
tuned.
we see. So, but
Yeah.
no, it's interesting. Clearly there's interest on his part. TCU doesn't have a head coach. But I mean, yeah, you mentioned the Kyler Jordan and Sledge and Emery Trey Emery. I mean, there's another Carmelo Jones, another defensive end committed. So like
Oh,
McGuire's
yeah,
offering
I forgot all about that.
entire, defensive line commit classes. It's pretty crazy. Um, and there's plenty of other prospects coming in for visits too. We posted the visitors list. I mean, just recruiting is just taken off, and there's just so much information and just things to follow right now if you're into that kind of stuff.
Well, you just mentioned that Seth had taken TCU commit off. I don't know what Carmelo Jones had, but when you mentioned his name, I'd forgotten all about him. And there's really no mention of Baylor commit on here either. I don't know if
He
that's new,
so
but
he's a 409 guy. Southeast of Houston. That's where James Blanchard's from, Orange, Texas, and that's kind of how he got started is in recruiting, as he wanted to help some of these guys because that's not a very highly recruited, part of the state. And so, I know that Carmelo Jones has a very close relationship with James Blanchard. So, that is interesting. And I would expect him to visit potentially as well. They're still in the playoffs right now at West Orange Stark. So, once the season's over, potentially in December, wouldn't surprise me at all to see him take a visit to Lubbock.
yeah, that I think me forgetting all about him in mid conversation when you mentioned him as one of the commits that was offered, I think that speaks to the volume of offers and the amount of recruiting activity on a daily basis. I mean, it has been really, I don't want to say unprecedented by any means, but like it has been a complete 180.
Yeah.
And I mean, it has been full steam ahead. We covered a lot there, Ben, and I know you already talked about home field earlier, so I'll just reiterate that both of those sponsors, Carnley Properties, Home Field Apparel, all that information will be listed below. Of course, this is a free podcast that we put out there into the ether, and you post on YouTube. We encourage you guys to join Red Raider Sports. I think it's well worth the price of admission. Obviously, Ben and I cover recruiting pretty extensively. But as the coaching staff is filled out and as there's additional media availability throughout the rest of the season, and then of course into basketball and baseball season, we've got a large team of folks that cover everything. Of course, you guys all know Chris Level, Aaron Dickens. If you're familiar with Texas Tech sports in general, they're there too. So we'll post more information about our promo. But the last thing we wanted to touch on, Ben, I say all that because I don't want to give everybody the whole list, right? I want to keep some stuff behind the curtain. But
Sure.
we've touched on a lot of these guys. I mean, this weekend is going to be nuts in terms of recruiting. And that's all sort of a byproduct of all these new offers. So real quick, the stuff that's already out there that's public. We've talked about Katy linebacker Ty Kana, longtime USC commit, reopen after the coaching change out there in LA, and is now officially visiting Tech after getting the offer last week. He took a visit to SMU, and he talked about a few other potential visits or virtual visits that he had done with some other programs, across the nation. But I mean, I think if a visit goes well, I don't know, Ben, how are we feeling about Ty?
I think you have to feel pretty good just, with Joey McGuire and all the momentum that he's built. Katy, Texas has a history of producing really good defensive players at the next level. I think those guys always go, to deep in the playoffs, and they have a really good program over there. But yeah, I mean, you interviewed him. I think his interview sounded great. I think he's very interested, and I've put in a future cast. I don't know who checks on that, but that's just how I think things are leaning right now.
Yeah, I'm pretty bad at the future cast, but let's say if I did future casts and kept up with it like you do, I would put mine in. I feel like there's a lot of good momentum there, and that's the craziest timing of all this, right? Is that you can do this after the middle of the season, identify your guy within a week and a half, and then have him hit the ground running. So it's definitely, like I said earlier, it's I don't know if unprecedented is the right word, but it's absolutely new and it's absolutely different. And so the other guy I wanted to highlight is Sydney and Bannister. That's another guy I talked with, younger brother of Nelson and Bannister, current defensive lineman at Texas Tech. They have an older brother that played at Oklahoma and Louisville, and athlete is what he's labeled at, 6'6", 208. The coaches see him growing into a receiver. Either way, they mention outside receiver, grow big enough to play some tight end, do that too, right? Move inside, use him in a variety of ways. He's very intriguing to me because this, I know it sounds lame, but this whole idea of a COVID year, there's going to be kids like this that aren't really recruited as hard as maybe they usually would, just because coaches have it's I don't know. I know we're playing football here in Texas, but with the open contact period, getting around to schools, there's only so much certain coaches can do. And I just don't know that the Austin area gets as much attention as Houston and Dallas when it comes to those coaches coming in and evaluating talent. But I mean, Utah, Vanderbilt, I think that he's probably got other coaches reaching out. So another kid, I think if we're talking about kids that could have a good visit and join the commitment list, and Bannister is another one. I guess anyone else you want to mention? I know you touched on Martin a little bit earlier.
Yeah. Well, and in Bannister, he also visited this summer unofficially. That
That's
was
right.
before he had an offer. So this won't be his first time, and I'm sure he's been to a few of Nelson's games in the past too. So, one other. I mean, there's several 2023s. We don't have to get too much into them. I do want to mention Anthony White just because he's Abernathy, West Texas product. Athlete, can play DB, can play, I think he plays quarterback first team, play some receiver, running back. He can really do it all. Just a very fast player who holds a few offers now. But Pittsburgh, UTSA, and now Tech. So he'll be there unofficially. He was at UT this last weekend, so he got to witness that Kansas loss. So, things that you hate to see. Unfortunately, went all the way to Austin to see them lose to Kansas. But no, I just, another West Texas product. So McGuire, keeping his word and, recruiting these guys.
It's funny you mentioned that, right? We poke fun, but I heard another podcast kind of spin it in the direction of, well, you can tell these 5-star recruits they need them next year and blah, blah. I'm like, yeah, that's what they want to hear. So anyway, but yeah, good, I guess fortunate timing there. But man, I'm not going to call out any more of the 2023s. All I'll say is that you're going to have Isaiah Crawford there, and you already have him committed as a Rivals 254 star. So, I don't know him. I haven't had a chance to talk with him, but if he's as vocal in person or, persuasive as he is on Twitter and kind of all about, being a Tech commit now, then, you look at a guy like I'm just going to pick Trey Wilson, right? Because he's another big defensive end from the Dallas-Fort Worth area, another 4-star Rivals 250 guy. Hey, why not Tech? I mean, seriously, if he meets him and Isaiah's this kind of big domineering, frame, and it's got all the offers and all that, why not Texas Tech? So I think that bodes well. And then, Isaiah Robinson, he's an offensive lineman I really like out of Arlington. A host of 2023 kids, and probably more that'll be added to this, that are just wildly talented.
A lot of stars.
Absolutely. I think you mentioned just shy of 10 4-star prospects on that list. So we'll
Yeah.
keep an eye out. But even 2024, I know it's like an informal sort of unofficial visit with his offensive coordinator. But Dylan Raiola is a prospect that Cumbie had offered even before the coaching change. And he's a kid that has pretty much every offer you can imagine already. And you look at the tape, you look at his build. I mean, he looks like the real deal. His dad's former Cornhusker offensive lineman, I believe, or defensive lineman, one of the two, and then had a pretty, decent career in the NFL as well up in Detroit. So, good bloodlines there. You're going to have to battle a couple of years for that young man, in my opinion. But man, I mean, just seeing guys like that coming on campus, seeing how many 2023 prospects. And then when you really look at it, we just talked about 3 guys that are 2022 prospects that there's a very, very real possibility that you lead in their recruitment right now, and it's a very real possibility that whether it's this weekend or the following week, that they commit to your program. So I don't know, Ben, I mean, it's Wednesday night. I mean, this list is going to grow. I mean, what are you thinking so far about, I don't know. We talked about earlier, all this momentum, all these numbers, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I hope they see a great atmosphere and a great game. I think you mentioned, Sheridan Wilson's going to be there too, a 2022 commit. So I know you mentioned Crawford, another guy who can kind of help you recruit. But I mean, overall, I mean, I don't know if I've seen a visit weekend like this. I think Tech could come out of it. We're here recording next week. It wouldn't surprise me if we saw if a couple more commits. I'm not reporting that. That's just kind of how things have been going around here. So definitely exciting um, I mean, yeah, it's I mean, I don't really have any other words for that.
Sure. Well, last thing, and then we'll wrap, because the Mavericks are about to beat the Suns, and I know it's going to bother
Unfortunate.
you without Luka, but anyway, that's a little peek behind the curtain, folks. But we talk about that, and we talked about the board, and one thing I saw mentioned was Joey McGuire attended a luncheon in Midland, and the number 22, I guess, was thrown around. And again, grades of slaw, right? But let's use that as an exercise, right? Maybe you have kids like me one day and they get on Sesame Street and we say, okay, we're at 12. How many more do we need to do? 22. We just talked about 3 guys. They've offered a bunch of Baylor, a bunch of TCU commits. We're going to see what else this list looks like. There's this weekend, which is your last big home game. Definitely a good time to host a visitor. You've got Texas high school playoffs going on. So really some kids that want to visit, but just simply have a game. You've got the next weekend is at Baylor. That ends your season. And then you start bowl prep, which is a positive. So, the next big date, I guess, is December 17th, which begins the early contact period, early contact period, early signing period. I was talking about the open contact period earlier.
Yeah.
So if I'm looking at my trusty calendar here, you've got basically 1-2 weekends before that, where let's say they can't make it this weekend. You can host a bunch of other kids. Again, that could include a transfer or 2, we don't know, but that leaves 10 more spots. And Ben, I guess my question is, I've thought about it a number of different ways. What does number 22 mean? And does that mean you save 3 spots on the annual 25, right? We don't know, because for the longest time, this number was at 9. And, really quickly, we know that with the 3 Cedar Hill commitments, it got to 12, and we've stayed at 12, but we both agree it'll probably be at 13 or 14 by, the next time we record this podcast. So that leaves you about 7 or 8 spots to get to that, 22. So I don't know. Are we looking at a quarterback, right? Fuente's fired at Virginia Tech. Alex Orji's back on the market. Well, not back on the market, but potentially available for a conversation.
Yeah.
Where does this go? And how does that coincide with the staff filling out? To me, man, if this is what 1 week looks like, what are we going to do with 3 more?
I'm just quarterback is a great question, because we don't know, if Donovan Smith balls out these last few weeks, what happens, in that room. It's interesting, but just looking at the offers, they've offered 2 receivers, at least 4 offensive linemen, at least 7 defensive linemen. So, they probably want a receiver. They probably want at least 2 O linemen, fair to assume they probably want a handful of D linemen, and a linebacker or two as well, since they've offered a couple. So that's what I'm looking at. I do think quarterback's an interesting question, because you know, I think it's worth, if you find a good one, it's worth adding. Like you, I believe that you should add a quarterback every class, or because you never know what happens at that position. So, I mean, yeah, 22 is 10 more spots. So, I mean, stay tuned.
And I think if you take Coach McGuire at his word, which I think we can, he wants to focus on kids that maybe want to move back to Texas, had maybe gone out of state or whatnot. And even if you use the most simple example from last year, I mean, look at a kid like Chandler Morris. He leaves Oklahoma, and he goes to TCU, and it's closer to home, yada, yada, yada. And, you saw what he was able to do once he got his first start. And so you never know. It could be a kid that's only been on another campus for a year, could be a kid that has 3 years availability. I'm not sure, right? But I do believe a small portion of that will still be, that transfer market or that grad transfer market. And as we learn more, we'll certainly get that up on the site. But yeah, no, just very interesting to me, Ben. I mean, clearly, like you said, with those offer counts, it's O-line and it's D-line. And I don't think you're going to see anybody complaining about that, around here. I think people have been beating that drum for years. And so definitely refreshing. I think that's all we've got. We've covered a lot, Ben. So for Ben Golan, I'm Matt Clare. This has been the Lubbock or Leave It Recruiting Podcast. Big thanks again to Carnley Properties and Home Field Apparel. For Ben, like I said, I'm Matt. You guys have a good one.